Hi class, this is our final lab for this class. So what we're going to do is set up a CA and we're going to use the web service to test it. A CA is a certificate authority. So the first thing I want to do is join my certificate authority to the domain. So I'm going to set the IP addresses up. The IP address for the CA should be 172.16.0.7. So 172.16.0.7 and it has a 21-bit subnet mask. The gateway for the west side is 172.16.0.1 and the two DNS servers on the west side are 172.16.0.2 and 172.16.0.3. And just to show you the IP settings again, 172.16.0.7. Our subnet mask is 255.255.248. The gateway is 172.16.0.1, and the two DNS servers are 2.3, excuse me, 0.2 and 0.3. So now I'm going to join it to the domain and rename it. I'm going to call this CA and the domain contoso.com. Now what a CA does is it passes out certificates that we can use for a bunch of different applications. We can create user certificates to make signing into remote computers more secure. We can create computer certificates for the same reason. We can create email tickets so we can sign our emails. We can create certificates for our web servers. So there's a lot of different types of certificates that we can create. So now I'm going to sign in. As other user and sign in as a domain admin. Now it's very important that you join it to the domain before you do this next step, which is install the CA certificate software. If you install it before you rename it, it won't allow you to rename it or join the domain. So you would have to uninstall it, join it to the domain, rename it, then reinstall it. So it's very important that you rename and join it to the domain before installing the certificate authority software. While that's logging in, I'm going to sign into www1 and www2. So I'm going back to my CA. So I'm going to go to Manage, Add Roles and Features. Now I'm going to choose Active Directory Certificate Services. Click Add Features to install the tools to manage your certificate authority. I'm going to install all these sub-items. Basically, this one that I'm leaving out is something that generates certificates for, I'm going to highlight it, certificates for routers and switches and things of that nature. In, in our setup, we don't have any of that, so we don't need to install that software. So basically, we're going to install our certificate authority. It's going to install a website that allows clients, both users and computers, to connect that through a web interface and retrieve certificates, retrieve certificate policies, and also a revocation list for the online responder. And I'll explain what that is once we get in setting it up. So I want to install everything but this network device enrollment service. Click Next. Next. It's going to install a web server because it needs it to set up the websites for the certificate enrollment service. Restart if necessary. Then install. I'm going to pause while it's installing. Okay, it's installed. So I'm going to click on Configure Active Directory. Excuse me, I'm going to click on Active Directory Certificate Service on the destination server. It's going to say you need um, some certain things done ahead of time, but I'm going to be doing this as a enterprise installation, not as a standalone installation. If you're doing it as a standalone installation, you need to be a local administrator and you need to configure these items. If you're going to do it in an enterprise environment, meaning within Active Directory, then you're going to need to configure these services. We're going to do it in Active Directory, so these will be the credentials I'm going to use. I'm going to pause the video for 1 second. Okay, so I'm going to click Next. I'm going to choose all these items. I'm going to press cancel. This is a glitch I noticed in 2019. I'm going to go back out and try to go back in. I'm going to press cancel, close this out, and remove that, and then add it back again. When you remove software, make sure you restart in between installing it again. Not all of you will get this error. So I'm going to pause the video again. So it's restarting right now. Once it's booted, I'll sign back in and then install the software again. So when it reboots and you sign in, it's still going to go through the process of uninstalling. So you can't reinstall it right away. I'm going to sign back in. If you didn't get that glitch, just stay right where you're at until I get back to that point. Now it's going to complete the removal. So it's completely removed. So now I'm going to reinstall it. ADCS and the tools. I'm going to choose everything but network device. Click next. Restart if needed. Now this takes a while, so I'm going to pause the video again. Okay, it's installed again. I'm going to try one more time. Okay, I didn't get the error. That's a glitch in 2019. A reboot doesn't help. The only thing that helps is uninstall and reinstalling it. I didn't choose this item because this certificate enrollment web service is used to pass out certificates. So users will connect to that site or computers will connect to that site and be able to retrieve certificates that they need, depending on what they are. We want to make sure that when people retrieve certificates from the web server, that they retrieve it securely. So to do that, they need a certificate. So we can't generate a certificate for the enrollment service until we have a certificate server up and running. So what it's going to do is it's going to allow me to install this, generate the first ticket, and then after that, it'll walk me through the wizard one more time to configure this, and at that point, a ticket will be available. So we don't want to pass out certificates on an unsecure website. We can't secure our web server until we have a certificate server, and we can't install this until our certificate server is up and running. So I'm going to click Next. Again, it's going to be an enterprise CA, meaning we have Active Directory. Um, we can also automate issuing certificates. If they're part of our Active Directory domain, we can automatically enroll them in a certificate. And as CA, you can't automate as much. Everything has to be done manually by the administrator. So we're not going to talk about this one. So I'm going to click Next. And we have two types of CAs, a root CA and a subordinate CA. Typically, in a normal environment, you create a root CA, then you go to another machine and you create a subordinate CA. And the subordinate CA will get a ticket granting ticket from the root CA, meaning we're going to authorize the subordinate CA to pass out certificates. Once that subordinate CA is up and running, what you're supposed to do is take your root CA offline, meaning you need to shut it down properly, disconnect it from the network, and put it in a secure location. Microsoft recommends that you send it to someone like Iron Mountain where they can keep it in a secure location. If your initial certificate that you're generating right now through this wizard is compromised, all the certificates that it creates are compromised. So you need to keep this root CA secure. And also this root CA can generate ticket granting tickets, and at that point they could create new subordinates. So you need to keep your root CA secure, and the only way to secure a network 100% is turn it off, disconnect it from the power, disconnect it from the network, and lock it up in a secure location. For this lab, I'm just going to use the root CA, but in a real environment, you want to create a subordinate CA. Then take your root offline. So we're going to create a new private key, or you could grab a key from a public key server or one that you had previously if you needed to reset up your CA. This is the encryption technology that we're going to use. This is why we have to have it joined to the domain and our computer name saved, set before we go through this wizard, because this information is based on the domain membership and the computer name. So once you generate the certificate, you can't join it to a different domain or unjoin it from the domain or change the computer name because it would make the certificate invalid. So that's why you need to join it to the domain first and have the name set before you even install the CA software. We're going to have the certificate for 5 years. So basically, when you take your root CA offline, you can keep it offline for 5 years before you have to bring it back. Once you bring it back, then you can generate another ticket granting ticket for the subordinate CA and take this one back offline. And Um, Once you do bring it back online to reissue the ticket for the subordinate, then you can generate this certificate for another 5 years. This is going to be where our database will be stored. This will be the location of our log files. Again, these are transaction logs, meaning we don't make changes to the certificate database directly. We make changes to the log file, and when it's safe to do so, it's going to update the database. We're going to use our Windows type authentication to our Windows integrated authentication to um, know whether or not we want to issue them a certificate. So right now, it's asking where do we want to get that certificate from to configure our web server. Well, we can't do that right now because we don't have a certificate uh, uh, authority to generate that. So we're going to choose it later. When we walk through the wizard the second time, this will get fixed. Because at that point, our CA will be up and running. Click Next, a summary page, then say Configure. So for that certificate enrollment policy web service, we're going to choose a certificate later. So all the things that I checked at the beginning of this wizard, here's how I just configured all of them. So I'm going to click Configure and pause the video. This takes a few minutes. Okay, it's done. So I'm going to click Close. Then it's going to bring me back to that wizard. It's saying one of the items that you've installed wasn't configured. Would you like to configure that now? We're going to say yes, and it will relaunch the wizard. Now this time I have a CA, so when I click this, it doesn't generate an error. That error is normal. It's not unlike the error that I got the last time, which was an access denied error. That wasn't normal. But if you try to check this the first time through the wizard, you're going to get an error. It's because you don't have a CA yet. So now I have a CA, I'll be able to walk through the wizard and configure this role. Also, when I configure this role, it'll actually fix the certificate problem we had for this role when we first walked through the wizard. Because I had to say select the certificate later. So when I add that certificate to the web server, it can be used by both these roles. This role you can't configure until the CA is up and running. This one you can configure, but you're just going to say select the certificate later. Click Next. It's asking what CA do I want to grab a certificate from. So I'm going to choose RCA. It's automatically populated. I'm going to use Windows Authentication to grab certificates. Now normally what you want to do is create a special account called a service account, preferably a managed service account that maintains the password for us so we don't have to keep resetting the password every 45 days. I'm not going to do that for here. I'm going to use this, a built-in authority. So basically what they're asking for is, I just want to make sure everyone's clear on this. I'll just open up a PowerShell and type services.msc. Give it a minute to pop up. So basically when you run a service, and let's pick a service that's installed here. Just for a lack of a better one, I'm going to choose this Dhcp Client. This is a piece of software that runs, so when you boot up your machine, it'll automatically go grab an IP address. So I'm going to go to Properties, and I'm going to click on the Login tab. You don't want to run the service as your administrator account. And if you do, and that service gets hacked, they would have administrative authority. So normally you create these non-privileged service accounts that are used to stop and start a service. Um, and this is the account that's being used for this service. It's just going to be a local service account. I'm looking for something else. Right here. Here's my web service. So I'm going to go into properties, and this account is going to be started with the local system account. Again, it's a non-privileged account that is used to start a service. Now what they're saying for the CA is they don't recommend using that account. They want you to create your own special service account and then make it a member of this group, the IIS underscore users group. Excuse me, IIS underscore internet users group. And let me explain what that group is for. When you go to a website, www.yahoo.com, are you asked to sign in? No. But can you imagine connecting to any modern computer and not having to sign in, regardless of the connection type? So when you connect to a web service, that web server actually signs you in on your behalf. If this was a Linux web server, it would automatically sign you in as the Apache user account. So there's a user account called IIS underscore internet user, and that user account is placed in this group. So they want you to create a service account, place them in this group. It will be used to start the service. And when users would connect, it would sign you in as that account. We're not going to do that. We're just going to use the built-in service account. But in actuality, you should be doing something like this. Create a service account, preferably a managed service account, add them to that group, then use that account here to start the service and allow people to connect to that website using that user account name, which will be transparent to the user. So I'm going to click next, and it's asking what certificate do you want to use for this website. I now have a certificate that I can highlight. If you don't highlight it, you can't click next, and click configure to configure this last role, then close. So now our certificate authority is up and running. It's really not really configured, and so I'm going to go to Tools, Certificate Authority. There's a whole bunch of certificates that this CA can issue certificates for. A user certificate is going to be structurally different than a computer certificate, which is going to be constructurally different than um, an email certificate. So every type of certificate is different depending on what that certificate does. So what we want to, and there's no way as admins we know the structure how to create every certificate. So Microsoft provides some templates that we can use. So if we want to issue a certificate for a user account, we have a template for it. If we want to issue a certificate for a web server, there's a template for it. So what we need to do is choose what type of certificates we want to use in our organization. Then create templates for that type of certificate. So what I'm going to do is highlight certificate templates, right click it, and say manage. Now listen, if you change one of these templates, you can't change it back. So what I like to do is copy every certificate and edit the copy. Don't edit the original certificate. So I'm going to right click the computer certificate. Let's say in my organization, I need a computer certificate. So when computers are talking to one another, we can do it more securely than just using Kerberos. It will use Kerberos, and on top of that, it will use the certificate. So it's going to be a more secure environment than just regular Kerberos. So I'm going to right click computer certificate and duplicate it. Under the General tab, where it says Copy of, I'm going to call it Contoso. The reason why I like to have all my certificates begin with Contoso, so when I look in this list, they're all together. So every time we go into a new template and we duplicate it, we need to look at 3 tabs. The General tab, the Security tab, and if it's a user type certificate, the Subject Name tab. And I'll explain that when we get to a user type certificate. This is just a computer certificate, so we don't have to go in here, but I'll show it to you anyways. So we want to publish these certificates in Active Directory. And under Security, for authenticated users, we want to enroll and auto-enroll. So under General, we typed in the name, put in Publish in Active Directory, and under Security, authenticated users, enroll and auto-enroll. Then under the subject name field, if this was a user type certificate, we want to unselect email address. We've never updated our schema to include an email field for our user accounts. If we would install an Exchange server, before you can actually install the Exchange server, you run a little utility that updates your schema and adds an email field to your user accounts. We don't have that field. So if this was checked for a user type certificate, and we try to generate a certificate, it won't be able to add it to Active Directory because there's no email field in our setup, in our Active Directory. So I'm going to click OK. So let's try a user type certificate. So I'm going to right click, duplicate the certificate, and under the General tab, I'm going to put in Contoso, all uppercase. So they're all in the same list. It's automatically checked in this scenario for Publish in Active Directory. When Microsoft came up with this template, that's automatically selected. Now for security, for authenticated users, we want to choose Enroll and Auto-Enroll. We don't want people just to read this template. We want them to actually go out and get a certificate. If you're a user account and you're on this domain, as soon as you sign in the first time after the CA is configured, go grab yourself a user certificate. The thing that I'm using the WW1 and the WW2 for is to show you how we manually request certificates. But these certificates that like a user certificate or a computer certificate, they'll get it in the background, so you won't see that anything happening. It'll just start working automatically. So I want to do something that allows you to see that certificate in action. So that's why I'm choosing these 2 machines as examples for certificates. This will work. You'll see that certificates are generated, but you won't really notice anything different on the network. But at that point, your network will be more secure. So we've done the General tab. We duplicated it, publish an Active Directory, put the name. For security, authenticated users, and enroll and auto-enroll, Now under the subject name field, we want to unselect anything that includes an email address because we don't have an email field in our Active Directory database for user accounts. So I'm going to click OK. And I'm just picking example certificates that most organizations might use. So let's say we have a domain controller, we want to issue a certificate for that. Again, I'm going to duplicate it. Under the General tab, change the name. Publish an Active Directory for security. Now, do I want to let any entity be able to auto-enroll for a domain controller certificate? In a case like that, I might just say only domain controllers can enroll and auto-enroll. I don't need the read checked because when they sign in, that will give them permission to read. And then under domain controllers, it will give them permission to enroll and auto-enroll. I don't want any computer just to be able to grab a domain controller certificate. So we did the General tab, we did the Security tab. It was slightly different this time. We only want to allow domain controllers to enroll and auto-enroll for a domain controller certificate. There's nothing to do under the subject name field because a computer account doesn't have an email. Now let's say we want to use a certificate to authenticate against a domain controller. So I'm going to duplicate that. General tab. I'm going to type in Contoso. And this wasn't checked, so I want to check it. Under Security tab, we want anyone who authenticates their domain controller to be able to enroll and auto-enroll. So if they're authenticated users, they'll get this certificate. Then under the subject name field, it doesn't have an email attribute, so we don't have to do anything here. So this is used for client machines when they boot up to sign into the domain controller. Your computer account has to sign in just like your user account. And now we're going to be using certificate and Kerberos as opposed to just Kerberos. Click OK. So all the traffic between our client machines and our domain controllers will be encrypted. We can do the workstation. General tab. Contoso. Security. Security rather. I'm just going to do authenticated users. It will include computer accounts as well, but computer accounts can't get, it will include user accounts as well, but user account can never check out a computer or workstation certificate, so I'm not worried about it. Then under subject name field, no changes because it's a computer account. Doesn't have an email field. General, type in the name. I forgot to check Active Directory. Security field, authenticated users, enroll and auto-enroll. I want to let's do an administrator one. Again, duplicate. This is a user type certificate. Contoso. Publish an Active Directory. I'm just going to do authenticated users, but in actuality, I might do, actually we'll do it right. For domain admins, I'm going to do enroll and auto enroll. For the administrator account, enroll and auto enroll. And for the enterprise admin, enroll and auto enroll. But not for authenticated users. Down in the subject name field, I want to unselect the two email boxes. So general, type in the name. For security, for the administrator, domain admins, and enterprise admins, make sure all these last four are checked. They can read, write certificates, enroll, and auto enroll. Click next. So guys, for your organizations, you're going to choose the certificates that you need to offer. If you wanted a recovery key, every time that users chooses to encrypt something, they'll use their certificate. They'll use their user certificate to encrypt everything if they want to encrypt files. But what happens if you fire them and delete their account by accident, which you should never do? You shouldn't delete an account. You should disable it. If need be, you can go into your Active Directory users and computers, reset their password, and be able to sign in to that employee's account after they're gone. But there might even be some sort of state law that says you have to keep that user account for 7 years. Like as the college, because we're part of the state, we have to keep all of our user accounts for at least 7 years. So there might be some law. So maybe your organization needs this EF recovery tool. I'm not going to bother doing it. It's the same process regardless of the certificates that we choose. I'm just giving you an example. Now, I'm going to do this web server one next. So I'm going to right click, duplicate the certificate, because this one has to be done manually. So it'll give you a sense of how to get a certificate. So I'm going to do a general. Under the general tab, I'm going to type in Contoso, publish an Active Directory, and go to the security tab. In real life, I would choose my web servers. But the problem is I don't have my web servers joined to the domain yet. So just for this purpose, I'm just going to choose enroll and auto enroll for authenticated users. But again, we're doing a security thing. This isn't real secure what I'm doing. I don't want to allow any machine in my network to generate a web certificate. I only want my web servers. So what I would do is add all my web servers and then only allow them to enroll and auto enroll. Also with that in mind, I'm lazy. So I'm just going to do this now as authenticated users. So general tab, we typed in the name. Oh, I have a little typo here. The other thing I want to point out, the template name can't have spaces. So if you look at this and you think, oh, I need to put a space in there, that's normal. There'll be spaces up here, but not down here. So Contoso, publish an Active Directory. Security, you would add your web servers to make sure they have the ability to enroll and auto enroll. I'm going to go to the subject name field. In the past, all of this stuff was pulled from Active Directory. The name, the UPN name, the service principal name, all the information that the certificate needs was pulled from Active Directory. But for web certificates, because it doesn't know the name of our actual site, you have to supply that information when you request a certificate. And I'll show you what that looks like later. So again, I'm just doing this certificate so you can see as interact with the CA. With the other certificates, they'll be automatic. So I'm going to click OK. And the last one, is the OCSP response signing. Remember when we installed the software, we said the online responder? Well, some of these tickets like I'm going to right click here and go to properties. So this ticket will be good for 1 year once I issue it to a computer. This ticket will be good for 1 year. Let's do the web server. This certificate will be good for 2 years. So what happens if a certificate gets compromised? Well, what I can do is I can revoke that ticket so people no longer trust it. But the problem is when I revoke a certificate, that computer account or that user account already has a certificate. So what they're presenting that ticket to doesn't show that revoke date. Uh, so we need some sort of mechanism in place so people, when they retrieve a certificate, it'll have an expiration date, but it's going to contact my CA to verify that that certificate hasn't been revoked. And that's what that online responder does. It publishes a revocation list. It publishes a list of all the certificates that we revoked. Now, we don't want someone to come up with a fake list saying these certificates were revoked when in fact they weren't. So every time we create a revocation list of all the certificates we revoked, we need to sign that list so people know that the list truly came from us, RCA. And that's what that online responder does. It publishes the revocation list. And this OCSP is the certificate used to sign that revocation list. So we need to generate an OSP response ticket. So I'm going to duplicate this, go to General, change the name, Contoso, and I'm going to publish an Active Directory, and then security. The only machine that should get this is my online responder, which is installed on the same machine as my CA. So I want to click Add, Object Type will be a computer account. And I'm going to type CA $. The $sign means it's joined to the domain. A computer account that doesn't have a $sign is not joined to the domain. So for locations, I'm going to look for a computer account called CA $. Click OK. And there it is. So I want this machine to enroll in auto enroll. I only want my online responder to have this ticket, the OCSP ticket. So I'm going to click OK. So guys, I gave you a variety of tickets that we can issue. You can do whatever certificates your organization needs. So I generated all these templates. So I'm going to close this window out. I don't want to say I generated those templates. I modified the templates that Microsoft had given us. So I just copied them and modified them. So I'm going to close this out. Now I need to offer those certificates in my network. So when a user connects to my CA, I want to be able to generate a certificate for that user the way that I specified. So I'm going to right click and say New Certificate Templates to Issue. Okay. I've never gotten this glitch before, but a lot of students have. If the certificates that you've customized aren't in this list, just reboot your CA. So if you don't see all the certificates that you've customized, just click OK and restart. I'm going to pause while it's restarting. Okay, I'm rebooted. I'm going to sign in. And I'm waiting. I'm going to go to Administrative Tools or Tools from the Server Manager. I'm going to go to Certificate Authority. I'm going to go down to Certificate Templates, right click. Now I'm going to say New Certificate Templates to Issue. And there's all my certificates. You might not have had to reboot, I did. Here's why I like to put my domain name at the beginning. So I can hold down Shift and choose all these templates, as opposed to hunting and pecking. Click OK. So now my organization will start passing out these certificates. Now I'm going to jump over to DC1. I don't know why this thinks the site's in French. I created the CA. The only problem is no one knows in my network that the CA exists. So what I need to do is generate group policies that tell my clients and my users to connect to the CA to get a certificate automatically. So I'm going to go to Tools, go to Group Policy Management. While I'm here, I'm going to go to Tools, Active Directory Users and Computers. For my user accounts, I'm going to reset my administrative password. If I reset it this method as opposed to clicking Control Delete, I can reuse the same password. When you do the Control Delete method, it forces you to use a different password. So I'm just doing this method so I don't have to remember a different password. Okay, so I'm back to Group Policy Management. I'm going to go to Group Policy Objects, create a new group policy. I'm going to call this Certificates. Click OK. I'm going to right click the policy and go edit. I got to remember where it's at. Go to Computer Configuration, Policies, Windows Settings, Security Settings, then Public Key Policies. We need to configure these three policies. Do you see these items right here? These are our certificates that we already trust. You can also access them in Internet Explorer, Internet Options, Content, and when we click on the certificates, there's all those certificates we currently trust, like VeriSign out in the internet. VeriSign creates certificates for other people. So if we trust VeriSign and they create a ticket for Wells Fargo Bank, we would trust the Wells Fargo Bank certificate because we trust the certificate server that issued those certificates. So if you wanted to trust a third-party certificate server, you could add them here and push that certificate out to all your clients. You can also, I'm going to go to the Start menu, type MMC, and create a custom policy, custom Microsoft Management Console. This machine is running slow. While that's taking its time opening up, I'm going to go back here. No, I'm not. I'm not going to keep switching around. I'm going to open up a command prompt. And here it is. I could add some snap-ins. I can add one called certificates for my user account, service account, or computer account. I'm going to do my user account. I can do it again for a computer account. I'm looking for one more, sorry. I don't see it in 2019. I could have added a snap-in in 2016 for the certificate authority management as well. So it's all under one snap-in. But once you have the snap-in, you can create it. So if you wanted to generate a certificate for a user account or a computer account, you can right click, say all task, find certificates, or automatically enroll and retrieve certificates. Or you could just reboot or sign off and sign on. It'll do the same effect. But if you wanted to see your certificates or play with them or mess with them, they'll all be in here. So this is a nice little utility to get certificates for user accounts and computer accounts. But again, we're setting it up to be automatic, so it'll automatically grab the certificates that are appropriate for the type of account that you're dealing with. If it's a user account, it'll grab user type certificates. If it's an administrator account, it'll grab an admin certificate. If it's a workstation account, it'll grab a workstation account and a computer account certificate. So we kind of set it up to be automatic. If you didn't say auto enroll, you have to go in here and manually do this, or you can go to a website and get the certificate as well. I'm not going to save this, but I just want you to be aware of that client-side utility to grab certificates. Okay, so we're back to our group policy. Under public key policy, we have to configure these three items. We want to create a certificate enrollment policy. Basically, we want you to look in Active Directory, find the certificate server, and enroll in the certificates. Then we're going to go to certificate validation settings. We want you to trust our root server. By default, you don't trust our certificate authority. What we're going to tell you is we're going to install a certificate as a trusted root, and we want you to trust that certificate. And not only by trusting that, you'll also trust any client-side certificates as well. So I'm going to click OK. And then for auto enrollment, we want to configure that as well. Not only do we want you to auto enroll, we want you to auto renew a certificate when it's expired. And if someone updates a template that we just configured, we want you to generate a new certificate. Then click OK. Now that's for computer accounts. So that was under policies, Windows settings, security settings, public key policies. Configure these three settings. Now we're going to scroll down to user accounts. Under policies, Windows settings, security settings, public key policies. Then we need to configure these three items. We want you to look in Active Directory for that certificate server. Once you find it, auto enroll for certificates, renew when they expire, and if the template's been updated, generate a new certificate. Now this one's different than the first one. I'm going to go to properties. Those root CAs that I was talking about are computer specific. So we need to tell all computers to trust that root CA. We don't need to do that for a user account because once that certificate is on the computer, they'll trust it. So this is not the same as the other. What this is going to do is, if you have a roaming profile and your organization use roaming profiles, you don't need to do this. But when I create a user certificate and I'm signed into this machine, I don't want to create an additional user certificate when I go and sign into another machine because the certificates are stored locally in my profile. If I have a roaming profile, those certificates will follow me. But if I don't have a roaming profile and I'm on a different computer, it might think I need a new user certificate. So to avoid that, we're going to tell the system to do credential roaming profiles. So basically, we want to store the certificates in Active Directory. So when we sign into the new machine, if we've already generated a user certificate, it'll be there for us. We don't want to create a certificate, save it on each machine locally, then have to generate another certificate on a different machine. This will make our certificates roam with us. If you have a roaming profile, you don't need to do that. So I'm going to click OK. And it's telling you if you have a roaming profile, you don't really need to do this. It could potentially cause an issue. So I'm going to click OK. And you can filter out who this policy applies to or what type of certificates you want to roam. So I'm going to click OK. So the policy is configured. I'm going to link it to Contoso. I'm going to link it to child. I need to reboot my domain controllers. This will still allow me to go to the motion. No, it won't. Okay, so guys, before I do anything else, I'm going to go to parent DC4, and reboot all my DCs. I'm going to open up PowerShell, the ISE version of PowerShell. We already created this script, so you could do it manually. I'm just going to use this script. I'm just going to press play, pause the video. It's going to be like 10 minutes. I'm going to stop it. It didn't read the script right, so I'm just going to close this and open it. File, open. Press play. Yeah, I can't do it this method. So I just have to do it manually. So guys, I'm just going to go through here and click on each machine and reboot them. So while I do this, I'm going to pause the video. I'm just going to reiterate. I'm going to reboot every domain controller in every domain and every site. Okay, I rebooted DC1, 2, 5, 6, 3, and 4. Again, in a production environment, you don't have to do that. We only have to do that in this ACIT environment. So I'm going to sign back in. Just give me a minute. I need to plug this computer in before my battery dies. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Tools, Group Policy Management. Now we link that certificate GPO to the Contoso domain. We want to use this one certificate server for all the domains in our force. So we want to link it to the child domain. I don't want to recreate the certificate. I can just, from the child domain, search in the Contoso domain for that existing certificate GPO. And I also want to do it for the datum. Again, I'm going to search in the Contoso GPO, find that certificate, certificate GPO, and click OK. So now all three domains have that GPO. I'm going to close out of the group policy object. I'm going to do a GP update, then at least reboot this machine. And I'll show you why in a minute. Okay, I'm going to do a GP update. Force. The certificates are going to be requested when the user logs in or when the computer boots up. So I want to reboot this machine because it will now be aware that the certificate server exists. Actually, I'm going to do it on the CA. So the CA doesn't know it's a CA yet until I do a GP update. I'm going to do a GP update, force. So this will read the policy about the certificates because the client account on this machine, the computer accounts on this machine aren't aware that this machine is the CA. And then I'm going to reboot. And that will force the client account and the user account to request certificates for itself. So when we go back into the Certificate Authority Manager, you should see some certificates have been generated. I'm just going to... Now in a production environment, you can just do this policy and the next time they reboot, they'll get the CA. They'll get the certificates that they need. I'm going to go back into the Certificate Authority. If I go down to Issued Certificates, you can see I've already generated a bunch of certificates. Before we can move on to the next step, we need to make sure that this machine has an OCSP ticket because we haven't configured that online responder yet that publishes the revocation list. So you'll notice that I don't have any pending requests because we auto-enrolled and auto-approved all these certificates. If we right-click, you could revoke a certificate if you need to. I'm not going to. Uh, if there's any failed issues, you'll see here, and it should show you an error message why that certificate failed. We don't have any pending requests because they're auto-approved. We will have one that will be temporarily pending when we crest the web certificate, but we're not there yet. There's all of my templates that I've created for the type of certificates I want to issue in my organization. So everything looks good so far. So the next thing we want to do, now look, I have people getting tickets from Contoso. I have people getting tickets from Adatum. I have people getting tickets from Child. So all this is happening automatically in the background. So the last thing we want to set up for the certificate authority itself is that online responder. So I'm going to go to Tools. I'm going to go to Online Responder Management. I want to highlight Revocation Configuration and add a new revocation configuration. It's real simple as long as you have that certificate. I can put in my company name, whatever you want here. I'm going to select a certificate for an existing enterprise CA. It's asking, where do you want to grab this certificate from or generate a certificate to sign this revocation list? We're going to use our existing CA. If I was doing this for a public environment like on the internet, I might want to use a certificate from a file that I got from VeriSign or something like that. We're going to browse Active Directory for our CA server. There it is. Click Next. It's going to say, do you want us to automatically select a ticket? If it doesn't show the certificate here, it'll try to auto-enroll. But by doing a reboot and making sure that we had the permission correct for the OCSP, it generated it automatically. I don't need to auto-enroll in it right now. Click Next, then Finish. Sometimes, guys, with some of the labs, this might not turn green. If that's the case, reboot. Okay, so guys, at this point, all we've done was set up our certificate authority. What I want to do next is I'm going to do it on a separate video because this was a lot longer than I expected because we had to install, uninstall, reinstall it, is I want to create a certificate for my web servers, and I want to also give you kind of a review on NLB and cluster these two web servers. So that's going to be our next step. I probably will get that video tomorrow. So right now I'm going to end this video. This will also give my network time to replicate that GPO that I created over here on the west side. I need to give it time to replicate over here. In class, I would wait like 15 minutes. So I'm going to give it longer than that in this environment. So this me breaking the video at this point makes sense. It'll give time for it to replicate across the network. Okay, that's it for this video, guys. I will see you in the next video, which will probably be tomorrow morning. Have a good night.